All right, good evening. Thank you for joining us tonight at RJ Julia for this wonderful event. My name is Joan. I'm very excited to be hosting tonight's Pride panel with these amazing authors. Tonight we have Chip Pons Marie Rutkoski, and our moderator is Troix Jackson. TJ Alexander was also supposed to join us. However, traffic in New York can be awful, and he ended up getting a snag, or they ended up getting a snag. We do have their book that's available to be purchased. So if you would like to buy their book at the end of the night. Chip grew up in Michigan and traveled the world as a photojournalist for the Air Force. He currently lives in Washington, D.C. We're so glad he's here to share his new book, Winging It, with me. Marie Rutkoski grew up in Illinois, lived in Moscow and Prague, and currently lives in Brooklyn. She went to Harvard, where she received a PhD in English literature. Marie is a New York Times bestselling author of several books for children, young adults, and adults. Tonight she'll be sharing about her new book, Ordinary Love. Our moderator tonight is Troix Jackson, who has moderated our Pride panel in the past. Troy is an assistant editor for Tor Publishing Group. She's worked with all types of genres from horror to fantasy. Please help me welcome all of our guests.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to, this is officially my third year doing this Pride panel, and I am so excited. I'm as excited every single year, but biased in saying this year I'm even more excited. I am so glad to be able to introduce the both of you today. And I want to kick things off by talking about the fact that both of the books that you've published that we're talking about today are romances, and they are both very beautiful and sweet and charming, and Marie, especially in your regard, kind of heartfelt and like really like tender. But both of them have this prevailing note about hope throughout the entire thing. And I would love to hear your thoughts on what that meant for you in the writing process. Is that like a theme that came up organically? Is it something that you thought about in regard to the plot? How did you get to the point of reconciling with hope being like a driving force through the narrative?
For me, like my goal with Winging It With You was just queer joy, right? Like I wanted, I self-published my first book, so this is my traditionally published debut, and I think I trauma dumped in my first one, so it was like, I'm so sorry if you've read it and like needed a therapist afterwards, but I was clearly working through some things, so I was like, I want light, I want cheesy, affectionately, and hopeful. I wanted these two characters to have that traditional rom-com feel of just joy on every page. That doesn't mean that they don't have, there's struggles, there's conflict, there's tension, but I just really wanted that to be the driving force of the whole book. And like that's been the most important thing for me to see readers say that it has felt that way. So, what about you?
Well, so I wouldn't call Ordinary Love at all a retelling of Jane Austen's Persuasion, but I did reread that book a few years ago, and if you're familiar with it, or if you're not familiar with it, it is about this woman who's kind of like lower aristocratic person, and she turns down this young man who loves her, but he's poor, he has no prospects, and so her family says, he's not good enough for you. And then many years later, he comes back to town, and this is Captain Wentworth, and he's now a member of the Navy, and he's very celebrated, he's wealthy, he's the hot ticket. Everybody wants Captain Wentworth. And I thought, wouldn't it be fun to write a book where there's a kind of Captain Wentworth-like figure, but she's like a butch queer woman. And that is the love interest, Jen, in this novel. And so I think this is a long way of answering your question, but I think what I want to say is that I think there's some hope in taking, for me as a writer, in taking tropes or characters or structures that have already existed for a long time, straight narratives, and then co-opting them and making them queer. That there's something kind of celebratory and fun about that for me as a writer. And then in terms of the content itself, in the book, I think that there's a lot of hope and love, not just in terms of romance, but also in terms of friendships. Jen, the character I mentioned, has this wonderful like queer community, found family, which is so important. And you also see how Emily, the main character, is like just so loves her children so much. And so I just think that there are, I guess what I'm trying to say in a very long-winded way is that I think there are many avenues to hope, and I try to create as many avenues as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. I think especially when we're talking about queer narratives, hope is something that comes up so often, and I think it is both. I think it's both something that like we are constantly striving for in queer stories, and it's always good to see characters that are aiming for something like beautiful, regardless of whether it's romantic or anything within their lives. And I think both of your books showcase that wonderfully. And you brought up tropes, and you did have a trope question. So both of your books have pretty huge tropes in them. We have a fake dating scandal, and we have a very beautiful second chance romance as well. Both of them are doing that thing of taking what is conventionally very straight in the romance space and turning it on its head, telling it through a queer lens. My tropes question is there a trope that maybe you thought about but that didn't get into the book, or a trope that maybe you would think about writing that just didn't happen to this time around?
I definitely was, so Leaning With You has like every trope, like literally it's fake dating, only one bed, like forced proximity, only one bed times like 100. Like
I'm jealous.
yeah, I know. Me too. Like strangers to lovers, right? And I really was gonna do enemies to lovers as well. Like I thought, how fun would it be to like that match and put that in there? But as I started writing it, they were just like too much lover boys. Like they
got along.
yeah, they were too lovely to each other, so I couldn't. So.
Wow, like listening to you talk makes me wish that I had done fake dating. There's only one bed. Yeah, in addition to, I mean, it's a second chance romance because the main character, Emily, the book begins when she's getting out of a marriage to a man who's been kind of manipulative. Maybe not, he is manipulative. And she runs into her ex-girlfriend. This girl that they fell in love when they were 18. So it's also a friends to lovers trope. And you see them, the book does sort of flashback to when they were teenagers and they become friends and then just become soulmates. So that was a really fun trope to write. And I didn't answer your question, which was, what would I like to write? Yeah, I'm gonna try to write your tropes next.
Okay. I'm gonna write your tropes.
Or, yeah, we're gonna do another event like that.
Yeah, and we're gonna write a book together.
Incredible, perfect, wonderful. My second phase of the question is we are seeing more and more queer romances published. We're seeing more and more of them enter the mainstream. Is there a trope that maybe you haven't seen in queer romances yet that kind of is pervasive in straight romances that you're fighting for? I'm really hoping for like a knight princess romance, and I haven't got one yet that is like heavily sapphic, and it is kind of funny.
I mean, I feel like we could get more queer like sports romances. I know they're becoming a thing, but like more of them. Like right, we have so many straight hockey romances, so many straight like football romances or basketball or whatever. But and also I think it would be fun to do Hollywood romances in the queer space. I know there are some, but like the biggest gay star who's out and it's not a closet case situation. And it's like he is who he is, or they are who they are. That'd be fun.
Yeah, bit of that.
Yeah.
On ordinary level, because Jen, the love interest, when she, like comes back, Captain Wentworth, like she's this Olympic track athlete, and she's out. She's kind of like an Abby Wambach or Megan Rapinoe like figure, and she's a model as well. So she's somebody
I see you
who's,
do that.
yeah, but you know, it's maybe not like the whole book. So, I don't know. I don't know how to answer your question. But I will say that one of my favorite co-optings of straight romance that I've seen in a queer book was in Aristotle and Dante Discovered the Secret City Universe, which is such a gorgeous book. I love it so much. It's young adult and it's so it just makes me cry every time. And something that's really special about that book is that you see the main character, Ari, who's this like tough guy. And when somebody goes after the guy that he hasn't yet admitted he's in love with, he beats them up. I'm not saying I advocate violence. I don't know. I'm just saying that there is a trope of like the tough man who will, you know, avenge his girlfriend and who will take down anybody who's going to threaten her. And it was really nice to see that happen in a queer narrative and see Ari do that for Dante.
Yeah, absolutely.
You're basically saying you support gay rights and loans.
And you're saying you advocate for
Yeah.
more people should, yeah, straight people, and I
That's so nice. No, no.
To highlight something that you said too, though, I think that especially in the romance space, a lot of queer narrative tends to cycle on coming out, especially for younger narratives. And I wonder what you think the next step of that is. Is it just, are we gonna move past the coming out story and are we getting to these characters are just queer? Is it going to be closer to ordinary love and that maybe it's kind of a reconciliation later in life with like, wait a second, let me reevaluate and kind of think of where I'm at and think about where I'm going. Do you think that we're gonna get a little bit more complex with it, or do you think?
And I wonder if you agree with this, but I feel like for so long, queer stories were in one box, right? It was coming out and then the heavy trauma. Like that's all we got. Those are the only stories that we got to tell. And so I don't think we're gonna move away from coming out stories because those are exceptionally valid and needed and like at every stage of life because everyone's coming out journey is different. I just think we're also gonna see an influx of like sitting in your queerness, you're accepting who you are fully embracing your sexuality, but like that's not the most interesting thing about you. And I just love that we can have these complex characters who like have whole other lives beyond their sexual identity. It's like a huge part of who they are, but it's not all they are.
Yeah.
And I think they can fall in love, they can trip and fall, they can, you know, have all the ups and downs that we see fictional characters have all the time. So I think it'll be more of a balance instead of just so heavy trauma dumping.
Yeah, absolutely.
I love that answer, Chip. I totally agree with that. And I would just say, you know, it's a truism of being queer that you're coming out all the time. That just happens. Like I'm queer. See, I just, you know, like that's me coming out to you. And I think that something that's really nice about it is that it doesn't have to be so traumatic or heavy or sad or problematic. I mean, it can be, and that is a valid experience, as you said, for a lot of people. But there's such a variety in the way that it can happen. And I think that is a rich kind of vein of ore to tap to mine. And I could see fiction doing a lot with it, you know, where it maybe we see more coming out narratives that are joyous, that are funny, you know, I think in like not in a, you know, mocking way, but in a joyful way.
Yeah. I had this one girlfriend when I was in the military and she was asked to speak on a pride, she delivered a speech at the pride event. And I'll probably butcher her words, but it was an incredible speech and she wrote an article about it. But she said, who I love is so irrelevant to how I serve, but it's so, or it's the like the foundation of why I serve. And I think I've always had that in my mind where it's like, your sexual identity is so important to who you are, but it's like not everything about you,
Yeah.
you know, and so I love kind of pushing beyond that when we're talking about queer stories and like they can be chaotic characters that we kind of don't like and just that they, you know, like,
Yeah,
it's like
absolutely.
different. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think especially if you talk about the way in which queer stories were boxed into one place for a while, there was also only like maybe 2 or 3 ways that you could be queer in a story. And it was either you're very traumatized and you're coming out, or you're like the bitchy lesbian sidekick, or you're like the very stereotyped gay male side. And in that way, I'm really excited to talk about books like yours. I'm really excited to see more books like yours in that we're able to both move past the traditional sense of what a queer story needs to be and also move past what a queer character needs to look like in order to be able to be considered valid. And I think it's especially more in the romance space. And I think both of your books do it so wonderfully. Yeah. So talking about your books, I did have a question. I wanted to ask more about kind of what got you to the point that you were like, this is the story that I'm telling. What inspired you to get to the narrative that ended up becoming the book that you have?
Yeah, well, I already mentioned the influence of persuasion, but also there's I don't know if you know it. There's a car commercial by Renault for Clio, and it's called 30 Years in the Making. I don't see any like recognition. I see no light bulbs or like yes, you know that. But I will tell you, you should go watch it. It's maybe 2 minutes long, and it's this beautiful story of these 2 women who meet when they're kids. It seems like there's some kind of foreign exchange element going on. And then we see them over 30 years as they grow from being kids to being young women who fall in love and then are sort of torn apart and they get back together again. It's a happy ending commercial. And I thought, wow, that was so moving. And
That's marketing right there.
And I just remember watching it and thinking, what would a book version look like? You know, if I could tell a story that's somewhat like that, but has the breadth and scope of a novel, where you can pack in so many years. I mean, Ordinary Love is a story that's told over time, and it's not told in chronological order, but you do see Emily and Jen when they're 10 years old. You see them when they're 18. You see Emily go to college and you know what that experience is like and being a young mother. And so I guess I really liked the idea of of a queer story that encompasses many years. Yeah.
I don't have a beautiful answer like that. I really wanted to do the fake dating trope, and I was like, how could I torture 2 men pretending to be boyfriends, like in the most chaotic way? And so I was like, reality television, check. Like let's put them on every mode of transportation known to man, like forcing them to be like in an economy. So yeah, the idea kind of just sprang from there. And then my like biggest personal red flag, and I'm embarrassed to admit this, but my husband and I watch like American Dad every night before bed. I don't know why that's become our show, but like for 10 plus years, that's been our show. I know like every episode, I fall asleep to it every night. It's so trashy. But I know. There's an episode called The Bitchin' Race, and it was their take on The Amazing Race. And so I was like drafting the idea of how I could do a reality television show, and they showed this, and it was like 2 polar opposite teams, one highly competitive and one just like lackadaisical, skipping through the challenges. And I was like, that's what we're doing. We're gonna make it like an Amazing Race spinoff where they're like traveling the world, but there's not actually a race, and it's all meant to be behind the scenes. And that was my light bulb moment.
I think that there's something beautiful in that too. I mean, it sprang from moments of you spending time with somebody who you love and being able to find.
That's a cute way to look at it. I think my husband was asleep, but that's fine.
Totally fine and valid, and I'll ignore that you just said that. Instead, it's a romance story. In that, I don't know if American Death qualifies, but I did want to ask you both if you have any queer media that you've been really into recently that you'd like to talk about.
Can I answer?
Go ahead.
Ultimatum Queer Love has just begun. I haven't watched any of it yet. It is, I'm hoping it's gonna be super trashy.
I hope so too.
Yeah.
I just been overcompensating. Thought that was really funny. Like it's a bit much, but it was really funny.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, it definitely lives up to the title.
Oh,
It is.
absolutely. Yeah.
I've just finished watching the latest season of Yellow Jackets, which is trashy in a completely different way.
Yeah.
And I have talked about it, I think every single time I've done this channel because I like that show so much. And it is just a bunch of women in the woods eating each other and also potentially eating each other. In a beautiful way. In that. Kind of similar.
I can't wait to
I
hear.
Not in the vein of
That.
cannibalism in the woods, I promise. Unless, of course, you're next. Some cannibalism in the works, or can you talk about kind of what you're working on next?
My next book comes out next June. It's called Dearly Departed. It is it's a small town rom-com where Hades is no longer Hades. He's a funeral director in small town New Jersey, and the gods are no longer gods, and they're just like having to do taxes, and it's like funny and very sad and grief heavy, but then his life gets set on fire by the sunshine forest next door.
Yeah,
And it's just cute and fun. And like I've been crying every day, and also it's the most fun I've ever had writing a book.
incredible and
Yeah.
perfect and wonderful. It's very fan fiction in that way.
Yeah,
super stoked.
I'm very excited. There's like a
Yeah.
lot of like smutty shadow stuff going on. So,
Incredible.
yeah.
Nice. That sounds amazing.
I'm entering my shadow daddy era. That's a thing in the book community. So
I'm gonna be a shadow dad.
you are. I'll make you a shirt.
Oh my god. You have
I
to.
will. The merch is already made, don't you worry.
I don't know what I'm doing next.
I like that answer.
I'm gonna write a memoir about being a shadow daddy.
And we're recording this, so.
Oh god. I did not know that.
No, that's perfect. So now we have it on record and everything is perfect.
The untold shadow daddy story.
Yeah. I am so glad I got to ask you all these insane and wonderful questions. And I would love to offer the audience the opportunity to ask you some potentially insane and wonderful questions as well. Does anybody have any questions that they would like to ask these two?
I had a question. It's you have family and friends who writing, and they always talk about, when you're stuck, write about what you know. And you just mentioned a little bit about where some of yours came from, but how much of your own personal life do you put into your books?
Well, when I admitted that I trauma dumped in my first book, I didn't mean to draw that much inspiration from my own life, but it was basically my entire life from beginning to end. So that was fun. And then I swore I wasn't gonna do it for book 2. And I feel like naturally like scenes from your life or like moments from your life kind of work their way in. I married into like a very big and warm Spanish family, and Theo, my main character, is Spanish, and he ends up, going back and having this moment with his family. And I definitely modeled that after my in-laws, and my father-in-law is this like behemoth of a man who is a teddy bear and who like cries every time he hugs me. And so like that was the vibe that I was trying to bring. So yeah, all the things I probably don't like about myself are in these books. So if you don't like it, you don't like me. So,
I'm sure everyone loves it.
yeah, they do.
Well, Well, I have two kids, and Emily has two kids as well, and there were some things that I took from that experience and put into the book. There's one moment, for example, when Emily goes to pick up her kids at school, and they run to hug her, and she's thinking about their height against her body, about how her daughter comes up to her ribs and her son up to her armpit, and she thinks about how in the playroom in the house where she used to live, their father would mark their height as they grew older. And she thinks about how her kids are going to sort of, it's almost as if they're invisible lines on her body that mark the stages of their lives, and how they're going to kind of measure themselves against her until they grow up and they no longer do that. And that was a thought that I actually had, and when my kids hugged me one day, and I put into the book, and there's some little conversations that I just pulled from real life. Like the son in the book loves turtles, and so does my kid.
Do you like have when you're hanging out with your people, do you have a notes app in your phone with like fun things that people in your life say, or like poignant things that
Yeah,
I've been doing that
yeah.
lately.
I mean, I don't do it in front of them.
Oh, I do.
I
And they like it, but
that maybe I should just be open about it. I'm just like secretly taking notes.
Oh.
At hanging out with them.
You hear something really funny and you turn and like around a corner.
Yeah, well,
With
I don't know. One time a friend mentioned how he knew somebody who was just like this serial professional person, where he was a day trader and then he was a competitive archer, and he would just become really, maybe like a pilot or something, and he would just become really skilled at each trade and then abandon it and move on to the next one. And I did steal that and just like assigned it to a super minor character.
Yeah.
Who doesn't even have like a voice in the book.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of stories end up kind of being anecdotes that the authors picked up over the course of their life, of just, this didn't spring from anywhere. I actually do know somebody who I saw like riding a bike down the street, and there was like a dog on the front of the bike and like a bouquet of flowers on the back, and I thought that's so funny, I'm gonna put it in a book. So in that way, stories are kind of always made up of different puzzle pieces throughout your life.
Did I hear right that you write for young audiences as well?
I
have.
have done that. I haven't lately. It's been a few years, but I did write for children and then young adult.
Would you ever think of writing a queer themed book for? And do you think it would be easily received by publishers?
So I have.
Okay.
Yeah, I wrote a duology called The Midnight Lie and Hollow Heart. They're fantasy novels. And it is a queer love story. And the publishers were great. You know, they were great, and it has been banned in some states. But
Yeah.
you know, I also think it's found an audience.
I feel like, not that it's easier in the YA space, but I do feel like the YA space is kind of more flooded with queer content than the adult space.
I think for sure
It's getting there.
it's getting there for
Yeah.
sure. And I think especially so because when you think about YA, you think about such a broad variety of genres. Like you have speculative YA also, of course, but also YA tends to be, you get a lot of like contemporary coming of age, and you have a space where it can just be stories about these characters growing up and growing into themselves. And in adult, you don't get that as much in the same capacity, but definitely in the adult speculative space as well, there's a lot of queer narratives. So I think, I'm biased, I work for a publishing company, but I don't think that publishers necessarily back down from the idea of writing or like having queer stories out there, as much as they are aware that sometimes that entails like being aware that that book is going to get banned somewhere. It's like that. Any question over here?
I have two questions if you don't mind. I was kind of curious, like, how can coming out be a piece of a narrative instead of a central part? Like, how can it be just a fact, like an experience, instead of like a big part of the plot?
Well, I personally feel like you just said it, like it can be an experience instead of like big part of the plot. We all at some point in our lives will come out, have experienced it. I think it's one of the most relatable aspects of queer stories. And I think like for contemporary like rom-coms, right? They have jobs, they have love interests, you know, there's other things going on. Um, and so I think just shining a light on like the found family, if it's a negative experience, shining a light on like them as an individual instead of their past. That's how I think it make it a more easily packaged.
Yeah. I mean, I think in Ordinary Love, it's not the central story. I think the central story is the love story, but also Emily, the main character, coming into herself and finding parts of herself that she left behind. And really, yeah, like staking out a claim in the world. And there is a moment when she comes out to her parents later in life. And I mean, I won't spoil it, but it goes differently in each case. But I guess I was just thinking as you asked that question, and as Chip gave a lovely answer, about how I'm not gonna say that coming out is always a wonderful thing, but I will say that something that it allows for is for us to be reasserting our identity all the time, saying this is who I am. This is the kind of person that I love. This is the kind of life I want to lead. And I think that in some ways, straight people might not have as many opportunities to think about that because their straightness is a bit invisible to them. And there could be maybe something positive or potentially rich in just having moments where you take ownership of saying who you are. And maybe that's something that could be maybe you worked into literature more often.
Absolutely. I think too in that vein, like, you know, I'm a grown adult woman and a lesbian. I almost tripped falling down the stairs earlier, and I'm a lesbian. In many ways, especially as we move towards stories where we can both have trauma and deal with that trauma, but also not need that to be the driving force of every narrative. We can also have stories where it is this a fact in the same way that somebody is wearing blue in a specific day and I'm a lesbian. You know, it can just be there. Yeah.
And I think it kind of circles back to what we're talking about, like for me, the queer joy aspect of it, where it's like growing up, I had this end of the world feeling when like if and when my sexuality was revealed, right? Like I only saw, oh my gosh, my parents are gonna leave me, like I'm gonna have no one, I'm probably gonna die, like that's what's gonna happen. And so I think the more we flood shelves with stories where it's like good, bad, indifferent, kind of funny, as you were talking about coming out experiences, kind of shows younger queer individuals that it's it may be the end of the world and it may not be, you know, like, and that's okay. And everyone's experience will be different. And I don't know.
Yeah. And you mentioned you had a second question.
I do. I guess I was wondering more in terms of ordinary love, like what is the difference between a coming of age and what you described your character went through, which is like coming into the poem.
So it is a good question. I guess I would say that you know, somebody who wrote a lot of YA novels, I was thinking constantly about coming of age narratives. And I think, and this is something that Emily thinks about as well in the book, is that as a society, we're so used to using coming of age to mean the moment where you shift from being an adolescent to being an adult. And it's as if that's the only time you come of age, but that's not true, right? You know, I think that's something you learn as you get older. Something I've learned as I get older is that there are many moments of coming of age, that you come of age kind of all the time. And so I think the answer to that question is that we see Emily coming of age as a 33-year-old, as well as when she's a teenager. And coming of age for her as a 33-year-old means asserting what she wants.
Yeah. And I think I saw a question, well, Philip.
I was wondering, so you talked about your first book being more of a trauma dump, and then your second book, you were able to have more of an expression of queer joy. What, having gone through the process of putting that first book out into the world with that vulnerability, how do you find that, like, your creative process in that second book change?
Oh, I feel like it gave me the freedom to like be my most authentic self. My first book is technically a romance, but it's definitely about fathers and sons. And I think I was holding on to a lot of like anger and resentment for my own dad. And so, I got all that out of my system and I was like, huh, okay, I think I healed a little bit of my inner child there. And like, I also am very happily married. I feel like I live in a rom-com fairy tale like 24/7. And so I think I just like was able to lean into that lightness and kind of give myself the space and the creativity to like imagine this hijinks filled scenario. And I think I was just able to write with a little more authenticity, honestly, and fun. Like I just gave myself permission to have fun.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Maria, I had a question, following up a little bit on, what you were saying about how it's an advantage in a queer life to be put in situations to assert yourself. And that's a way for me to think about the question I wanted to ask, which is how in your book or for you as a writer, you think about the tropes of queerness working around the tropes of motherhood, which is another kind of coming out experience, but it's like also very scripted, right? Where people get trapped in mode. So I'm curious how you have this character who's going through those two things. Does the queerness help Emily assert herself as a mother? How do those two things fit together for you?
Yeah, so that's such an interesting question. Sarah is my very dear friend. We've known each other for decades. I will, yes, we did come of age together. I mean, I will, just to clarify, I don't think that it's always an advantage to have to be coming out all the time. Like, it's also a burden. I'm just saying that there can be a more positive way of seeing it or taking ownership of it, like taking it back. But how does Emily's queerness relate to her motherhood? It's such a smart question. I would say that, I think that when you have a kid, you become aware of just like the fragility of things, right? It is such a risk to have a child. It's also such a pledge of faith to the world. Like you're gonna trust that the world is gonna be good enough for your kid, right? And so yeah, I know, like we're living in sometimes where that can be questionable. But I suppose I would say that Emily is very aware of that fragility. She didn't plan on having her first child. Her first child was an accident, and she feels like she had him so young, and she was 21. And she is somebody who loves her children dearly and is also, I think, kind of poignantly aware that they're not going to be hers forever. Like, to go back to that earlier thing I was saying about how they're going to grow up. The point of having children is that they grow up and they become strong enough to leave you. And so I'm really trying to find a way to tie it back into your question. I suppose I will say that maybe the way it relates to queerness is that there is a kind of fragility in trusting the world to be good to you, you know, when you're queer. And I think that Emily comes into that trust.
Who worked it?
Tried really hard.
I know that he alluded to this a little bit, each of you, Chip, maybe more so. But would you be willing, so I'm a late in life blooming. So I'm wondering if you would be willing, and if not, I understand, to share your own personal health story.
Sure. I'm a yapper, so I had always dated women. I was very aware that I was sexually attracted to men, but I was very much like in denial about that. That didn't mean anything emotionally. It was just like a physical thing, whatever. And then I joined the military and went through basic training, went through tech training, got stationed at my first assignment. And I walked into like an orientation class. It was like a 2-day class where kind of get set up for success on the base, where it's like, here's all your helping agencies, here's like where you can do laundry, here's like, you know, the best places to eat and the ones to avoid in town. And the person instructing that class was my now husband. And I walked into the room and it was like the cartoon moment where you just like get bashed over the head and the hard eyes come out. And I'd never felt that feeling before. It was like, it's kind of sad when you think about it, but it was like experiencing a crush for the first time. Like I felt that attraction, and I just wanted to know this person. And he was like, you stay after. And I immediately like sat up straight, right? It was hot, yeah, but it was also, I was terrified, right? And I had just come from basics, so I had like a buzz head, I looked awful, it was just the worst. But his entire demeanor changed, and he was like, we were the same career field. So he was like, I know we're gonna be coworkers eventually, I'm just here for a couple months, but if you need anything, I'm here. And it was like this very simple, like, I'm here. And I was like madly in love with him from that moment on. And so yeah, he was the first guy I ever dated secretly for a long time. And then my military supervisor found out and called my family and told my family that I was gay and I had a guy and all this fun stuff. And like I did experience that life imploding moment of like, oh my gosh, I have to make a choice. And I chose me in that moment. I was like, you know what? Cool. We almost got kicked out of the military, but we didn't. We had a courthouse wedding on a Tuesday during our lunch break, and that was that. We've been together, this is 10 years.
There's so much sweetness in that story, and it makes me angry. Like
Yeah.
I can't believe that
Yeah,
your supervisor
so
called
fun.
your parents.
Woman too.
That's crazy. Yeah, I guess I would say, I mean, I was aware when I was younger that I liked girls. But I think compulsive heteronormativity is a real thing. And I dated men, I married a man, and like you know, like I came out later in life. And yeah, I mean, I think it's really it's also, what would I say? I don't have such a great story as you do.
That's a great sport.
Like, no. Is it dramatic?
That's dramatic. We'll talk later.
Okay.
And when you met your husband, so yeah, it all worked out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good question.
Yeah. Well, you have had your hand up in the back several times.
Period. You have a free schedule for like writing and promoted writing book, and you know specifically talked about your husband, how you navigated that, and then life was like.
Yeah, I mean, you said you have 2 kids.
I have 2 kids, and I also, like you, I have a day job. I'm a professor of English literature. So I guess I try not to have a real schedule or kind of ritual, because then I would never get anything done. So I just write whenever I have free time.
Yeah.
When it, in holidays, for example, I'm lucky that I'm a teacher. I have a lot of time off in the summer. And now my kids are older, they're 16 and 13. So they don't need me really.
Self-sufficient.
Yeah. Like they're just playing video games with each other
Yeah.
all the time. Yeah.
Yeah, I try not to do a schedule because I'm like, if I have to do something, I don't want to do it. And so like I'm very thankful that I wake up super early, so I'll take like an hour or 2 hours before work, and then I'll write on my lunch break, and then like while we're just on the couch watching TV, like I'll have my laptop or my phone out doing some stuff.
Yeah.
Squeeze it in when you can.
Yeah. That works. My day job is looking at books, so much of it is, I don't know how writers do it. I need to be locked in 9 to 5.
Thank you.
I want to thank you so much.
Yeah.
We're gonna move to the signing portion, so if you did buy a book, or if you're interested in buying a book, Chip and Marie are gonna do signing, okay?